Manchester United are a really good example of how it can be difficult to build and manage a squad, and that is what we're going to talk about in today's video. Welcome to Sensible Transfers, where we take squads, look for weaknesses in those squads and try and solve them in the transfer market. Now, we're not interested in rumour, we're not interested in conjecture. All we want to do is find sensible solutions to those problems. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Manchester United. Now, if you look at the Manchester United squad, what you'll notice is that the starting 11, which we've highlighted here, is actually quite strong. But once you start looking at the depth behind that starting 11, a few problems do start to emerge. So at the top of the field here, you can see we've got Anthony Martial. He's the only number 9 really they have available to play there. So there's clearly an issue here. And then if we look in the central midfield area, although we do have backups to Eriksen and Fernandes, they maybe don't profile as well as you might like. So we've got Donny van der Beek behind Bruno Fernandes, and he's barely played during his time at Manchester United. And then behind Eriksen, we've got Fred and Scott McTominay, and the problem with those two is that they don't really profile that nicely against Eriksen or Casemiro, and so there's a sense in which neither of those two are actually going to be backups in either position. And then if we look at the back line, then we do have some great starting centre-backs in Martinez and Varane, but behind them we've got Victor Lindelof over here, who isn't really a left-sided centre-back, he usually plays over on the right, and then we've got Harry Maguire, who's had an interesting couple of seasons at Manchester United, probably wants to leave in the summer too, so there's definitely work to be done around here. And then in the full-back areas of the field, Manchester United do have good starting options and okay backup options. They're probably going to want to move Aaron Wan-Bissaka on at some point, but that then brings us to the goalkeeper area. And despite the fact that Manchester United have a lot of options here, we've spent the whole of last season talking about whether or not any of these options can really play the sort of build-up football that Erik ten Hag wants. So there's lots of work to be done all the way across the field. But this isn't the only problem that Manchester United have when it comes to squad building. In fact, there are two other areas that I think are going to be really important over the coming summer. The first one is the budgetary requirements that Manchester United will have. Because as things stand, Manchester United are going through a bidding process to potentially find a new owner. And it could be the case that by the end of the window, they have a different owner, or it could be the case that they are still owned by the Glazers. Now, why is that important? Well, it will change the size of the budget that they have to work with. Particularly if they're still owned by the Glazers, you'd think they have a much smaller budget to work with. Why might this be important? Well, if Manchester United are going to spend this amount of money on a starting number 9, and that means there's only going to be this amount of money left for all the other positions. Similarly, if they spend this amount of money on a starting central midfielder, then there's only going to be this amount of money left for the other positions as well. So budget is going to be really important. The second problem that Manchester United have concerns the age profile of their squad. So if we go back and look at the starting 11 in particular, we can see there's a number of players who are getting a little bit old. So for example, Christian Eriksen is 31, Casemiro is 31, Bruno Fernandes is 28, but he will be turning 29 soon after next season starts, Varane is 30, and then we have Luke Shaw and Martial, who are both 27 years old, so within a few years of their 30s as well. And this presents a question for Manchester United, because there's two options here, a short-term one and a long-term one. Now, the short-term option involves focusing on the players that you already have, adding some more prime age players to that group, and then really focusing on trying to compete at the highest level for a few seasons. But this does come with a risk, and the risk is that in the long term, you're actually creating more squad building problems for yourself. Now, the longer term option is to focus on the future from the off, not worry too much about winning anything in the short term, but bringing in young players so that in the future, your squad is just in a much healthier position. And these two issues, the budgetary requirements on one hand and the squad age profile on the other, are going to be the two factors that determine the way that Manchester United's summer transfers are going to go. So with all this in mind, let's just have a think about how this might play out in the transfer market for a couple of positions in the Man United squad. And one of the most important positions that Manchester United do need to address is the number 9. Now, as we've already said, there isn't a huge amount of depth in this area, and there's an argument to be made that Martial doesn't even fit the profile that Erik ten Hag would want, because as we've seen from his previous teams, what he usually wants in this sort of position is a classic number 9. So what is he going to want his classic number 9 to do? Now, first and foremost, he's going to want a number 9 who is going to be a box threat. He wants someone who's going to get into these areas of the pitch and just score a lot of goals. But there are other things that he's going to want as well. Manchester United are quite a transitional team, so Erik ten Hag is going to want a number 9 who can run in behind and generate chances in that way. But he's also going to want a centre forward who's going to be able to occupy opposition centre backs and also pin them in order to create space for his teammates. So let's imagine that Manchester United are building up in a wide area. Erik ten Hag is going to want his centre forward to make these front post runs, because if he does that, then he's going to drag the opposition centre-backs with him, and this is going to open up a huge amount of space now on the edge of the box. So if you've got a more creative player like Bruno Fernandes here, if the ball does end up coming out to his feet here, he does have the chance of scoring goals as well. So that's all coming from the centre-forward making this front post run, dragging defenders with him and creating space in behind. And another skill set that Erik ten Hag will want his number 9 to have is the ability to hold up the ball and actually link the play with his teammates. So we've talked a lot this season about how Manchester United have had problems in build-up, and one of the solutions they've found to that is having the ability to just play the ball long to a striker. Now, if your striker is able to bring that ball down under pressure from opposition defenders and then bring his teammates into play, what you've actually done is you've moved the ball down the field and you're now in a situation where you can start trying to find these attacking moves as well. So it's really important to have a number 9 who's able to do that hold-up and link-up play as well. So the million-dollar question is, who should Manchester United bring in to be their number 9? And they have been linked with a lot of players around European football. But in reality, the answer to that question should be, does it really matter? Because the problem is that Manchester United don't have a number 9, and so any number 9 is better than no number 9. And any of these players who are playing at a fairly high level would be fine to come into Manchester United and would immediately improve them. And so the biggest factors that are going to influence Manchester United's decision here are those external factors, budgetary requirements and squad age profile requirements. Now, one of the potential targets we've talked about a lot for Manchester United has been Victor Osimhen of Napoli. Now, Victor Osimhen is 24 years old and he's been playing at the highest level he's been performing in the Champions League and in the domestic league. And because he is 24 years old, he solves the squad age profile problems that Manchester United have, because you can bring him in and he will perform immediately at the level that they need to compete at the highest level. And also, he's so young that he's going to be the starting striker for Manchester United for 5, 6, maybe 7 years into the future. But the problem with Victor Osimhen is that because he has his whole career ahead of him and he still has 2 years left on his contract, Napoli can ask for a lot of money from Manchester United for him. And that would mean that if Manchester United did go for him, it means they wouldn't be able to address some of the other problems that they've got in their squad. Now, another option that Manchester United have been linked with in the number 9 spot is Harry Kane of Tottenham Hotspur. Now, Kane is great because he's a slightly more budget option because he's arriving at the end of his contract with Spurs. But the problem with Kane is his age. He is 29 years old. He's going to turn 30 soon after the season starts. And so this presents us with a squad age profile problem. Because the thing is that Harry Kane would be able to come in and perform well in the short term. He would be great for a few seasons, but he's going to decline quickly. And that means that Manchester United would have to bring someone else in behind him as a backup option who's going to be able to be happy sitting on the bench for a few seasons. That would allow them to develop, but it does mean that you're probably going to have to spend more money in the short term for the long term as well. So despite the fact that Kane is slightly cheaper, he's still adding to the price further down the line. So these are the kind of calculations that the Manchester United recruitment team are going to have to make throughout the summer. There's plenty of options available for them, and there's no right or wrong answer really, but if they choose one thing, it's going to have a knock-on effect for them somewhere else on the field. So let's take a look at another area of the pitch that Manchester United need to improve on, and that is the central midfield area. And in particular, as we've said, we have Christian Eriksen here, Casemiro here, and they're backed up by Fred and McTominay. But the problem is that neither Fred nor McTominay really profiles well against what it is that Christian Eriksen does and Casemiro does. But there are a couple of problems here too. On the one hand, Christian Eriksen is starting to decline physically, and so Manchester United are going to need someone who can take up a chunk of his minutes next season. And on the other hand, we've got Casemiro here, who has been getting suspended a fair amount since he's joined Manchester United, and so there are going to be minutes available in his position as well. Now, you may think that the solution to this is to bring in 2 different players, one who can replace Christian Eriksen and one who can replace Casemiro when necessary, but there's a more elegant solution here, and that is to bring in a player who will eventually replace Christian Eriksen, but who can also fill in for Casemiro when he is suspended. But the question is, what is that player going to be expected to do? Well, we all know what Casemiro does. He's a really elite defensive player. He's going to sit in front of this back four. He's going to cover a huge amount of ground. He's going to be able to read the game intelligently, so he'll be able to make interceptions, but also when he wins the ball back, he is going to be able to lay the ball off into his teammates in the forward line in order for them to start these counter-attacks. So the player who is brought in is going to have to be able to replicate everything that Casemiro does, but he's also going to have to be able to do the stuff that Christian Eriksen does. Now, Christian Eriksen is a bit more of a link player. He's going to move between the defensive unit and the attacking unit, and the idea is he's going to help them move the ball from this area into the forward areas of the pitch. So he's going to drop in, pick the ball up, help out in build-up, but then you need him to progress the ball in some way. Now, Eriksen usually does that by passing the ball. We could also find someone who would be able to move the ball forward by carrying as well. So we need to find a player who can do both of these things simultaneously. So the gold standard for a sensible transfer in this position is Barcelona's Frenkie de Jong. You will all have seen him from his time at Ajax. He has played under Erik ten Hag, so he's just the perfect fit for this kind of system. And as we can see, he is an elite ball progressor, not just in terms of passing, where we can see his progressive passes are in the 97th percentile and his passes into the final third are up in the 95th, but he's also really, really good at carrying the ball as well. So high 90s percentiles in both carries and progressive carry distance. So this is a guy who's going to have no problem picking up the ball and progressing it down the field for Manchester United. But the big question is Can he replicate the sort of things that Casemiro is doing? And as we can see, his defensive numbers here aren't quite as impressive as his progression numbers further up here. But it is worth noting that De Jong has played in the defensive midfield position for Barcelona when Sergio Busquets isn't available. And actually, if we look at the defensive numbers, we can see that he is above average when it comes to interceptions. So he's clearly good at reading the game defensively. And in that respect, he would be able to perform Casemiro's role pretty well. But the big problem with Frenkie de Jong is that he still has 3 years left on his contract at Barcelona, and that would mean that his price would be towards the more expensive range if Manchester United were going to try and get him. But it is worth noting that Barcelona are in need of money, and so they are trying to generate some revenue through player sales, so he could be available if that is the case. And one more thing with Frenkie de Jong, he is 26 years old, which probably puts him towards the upper end of those age profiles that Manchester United will be looking at if they're thinking of being smarter in the long run. But as we've said, Manchester United are going to be governed by external factors, and it may be the case that Frenkie de Jong is just outside of their budgetary requirements altogether, in which case they're going to have to try and find someone a little bit cheaper. And the player that I want to suggest as a cheaper option for this kind of position is AS Monaco's Mohamed Camara. Now, Camara's passing stats aren't as impressive as Frenkie de Jong's, but that shouldn't be too surprising because de Jong is one of the most elite passers in world football. But it is worth saying that Mohamed Camara is a bit more of a build-up passer, so he's doing a lot more short passing, which isn't going to show up in this data. And it's also worth saying that Mohamed Camara is a really good press-resistant midfielder, and that's going to be super important to Manchester United because they're going to be trying to improve their build-up play, so he's perfect for this role. It's also worth noting that he's a really good carrier of the ball, and that is important because Manchester United don't have a huge amount of players who can do that, and also progression of the ball doesn't really matter. You can progress the ball by passing or by carrying, and he's obviously very good at that side of the game. But the really impressive aspect of his data is the defensive side of things, and as you can see, he's pushing the 90th percentiles in terms of tackling and passes blocked. That's going to be really important as he replicates the sorts of things that Casemiro is doing. Another nice aspect of Mohamed Camara is that he has played as a single pivot for RB Salzburg, but he's also played in a double pivot for AS Monaco, so you'd expect him to be able to be comfortable moving between that pivot position for Manchester United and then covering for Eriksen as well. Now, Mohamed Camara does have a 2027 contract with Monaco, but despite that, he would still be a more affordable option than Frenkie de Jong. So what will this look like in practice? Well, throughout this video, we've been talking about how the important factors here are going to be budgetary and squad age profile factors. And that means that if we bring in someone like Victor Osimhen, there may not be as much money to spend on someone like Frenkie de Jong, and so we might see someone like Mohamed Camara coming in. And vice versa, if de Jong is brought in as the midfielder, then it could be the case that Harry Kane is brought in as the striker. So the big question with Manchester United is not who they're going to sign, but how much budget do they have available, and what decisions are they going to make about squad building in the future.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.